All right, so get ready, because today we're going deep on something you all know well.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little too well. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7.
All right.
But we're not doing love is patient, love is kind. We're not rehashing all that. You already know those. We've got a whole stack of sermons from pastors all across the country, and they're all tackling this passage.
Okay.
We're going to find the stuff that made people in the pews go, whoa,
Right.
stuff you can use.
Yeah, the unexpected angles, the stuff that you just wouldn't think of right off the bat.
Exactly.
It's amazing seeing how pastors take this text and make it new again. You know?
Yeah.
It proves there's always something new to discover, even in the most familiar parts of the Bible.
Absolutely. So what are some of the common threads that you saw?
Mm.
What are pastors really into right now when it comes to 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7?
Well, one thing that really stood out was this focus on love as an action. Not just a feeling,
Right.
not just good intentions, but really putting love into practice. Menlo Church, for example, they had this sermon, Embodying Love, the challenge and call to serve. And they used this really powerful image of Jesus washing the disciples' feet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this stark reminder that love isn't about status or power.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
it's
yeah.
about service.
It really challenges our ideas of leadership, doesn't it?
It does. It completely flips the script and says that real leadership is about serving others, not the other way around.
Yeah, and that seems to be popping up a lot in these sermons, huh? It's not enough to just talk about love. You have to actually do something.
Exactly. Community church, they had this 70-20-10 principle.
Okay.
70% of embodying love is actually doing it. 20% is building relationships where you can practice that love. And only 10% is actually like teaching about love.
Oh, that's interesting.
What do you think about that? How does that challenge how we usually preach on love?
I mean, it really changes things up. It's like sermons are just the start.
Yeah.
The real work happens in our daily lives and how we treat each other, in the choices we make.
It's about building a culture of love.
Yeah, not just giving a good sermon on Sunday morning.
Exactly. And that's where some of those creative sermon illustrations were so effective. You know, I was really struck by Southwest Church's analogy of eggs in mayonnaise when they were talking about loving the unlovable.
Okay, I got to hear this one. Eggs and mayonnaise. How does that even relate to 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7?
So they were talking about how eggs are emulsifiers, right?
Okay.
They blend oil and water, which normally wouldn't mix.
Yeah.
And they said love is like that. It brings together people who are completely different, even people who clash.
Instead of separating them, love binds them together.
Yes, exactly. It creates unity where there wouldn't be any. It's a powerful image, and it really makes you think about how love can change things.
That's definitely not your typical Sunday school lesson.
Right.
And speaking of unusual analogies, Seneca Creek Community Church, they used the Japanese art of Kintsugi
Oh, yeah.
to talk about relationships.
Yeah, repairing broken pottery with gold.
Uh-huh.
It's a beautiful metaphor for how relationships can be broken, you know? But when they're mended with love, they actually become even stronger and more beautiful than before.
So it's not about avoiding the hard stuff, but about seeing the brokenness as a chance to grow.
Exactly. The cracks and imperfections become part of the story.
Yeah.
And they make the relationship even more beautiful and resilient.
That's a powerful message, especially for people who are going through tough times in their relationships.
It reminds us that healing and growth are always possible, even when things are painful. It challenges us to see the beauty in the brokenness instead of hiding from it.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what other things we could use to illustrate these verses. You know, things that seem totally unrelated.
Exactly. That's what's so great about this passage. There's always more to find, more to explore.
It's a bottomless well of inspiration.
It is.
So we've got love as an action, love as something that brings us together.
Mm.
Were there any other unique perspectives that pastors were using?
Yeah, one theme that kept coming up was this idea of bringing God into our relationship. So Seneca Creek Community Church, they called this, moving from transactional to triangular relationships.
Okay.
So instead of just you and me, it's you, me, and God at the center.
So we're not just thinking about what we can get out of the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but we're inviting God into it.
Right. It's about understanding that love isn't just something we make up. It's a gift from God. And when we ask God to be part of our relationships, it changes everything. They become more meaningful,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
They become transcendent.
So it's not about using God to get what we want, but about letting his love change how we relate to each other.
Exactly. It's about letting go of our selfish desires and letting God's love lead the way. It's a tough concept, but it can totally change how we interact with each other.
Yeah, it really changes how we think about love.
It does.
It's not just about being nice or doing the right thing. It's about letting God's love flow through us and touch other people's lives.
It's about becoming channels for God's love, letting His grace transform us and the people around us.
So we've covered some really powerful themes here. Love is an action. Love is a unifying force. The importance of bringing God into our relationships.
Right.
And we've heard some really creative illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to know, how are pastors breaking down the specific things about love in this passage?
Yeah, let's get into that. So we talked about love in action and God's love, but what about the specific parts of love that Paul talks about? How are pastors actually bringing that to life in their sermons?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah.
What are some of the less obvious insights they're pulling out?
Well, one that really jumped out at me was this emphasis on love keeps no record of wrongs. It's easy to just skim over that, but some pastors really dug deep into what it means to truly forgive, to let go of past hurts.
And how hard that can be.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, right? To not just say the words, but to actually let go of that anger, that desire to get back at someone.
Right.
And that's where those practical examples can be so powerful. Community Church, they compared it to taking out the trash. They said if you keep holding on to those hurts, it's like letting garbage pile up in your house. It starts to stink and it affects everything around you.
Yeah, that's a good one, because it shows how unforgiveness really messes with your life.
Yeah,
It's not just about the other person, it's about you too.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
we're poisoning ourselves by holding on to that bitterness. And First Church Love had a similar take on it. They used this image of a locked chest. They said that all those past hurts are locked away, but we're still carrying the key.
Right.
To truly love, you have to unlock that chest and let go of the pain.
So it's not about forgetting, but about choosing how those things shape us now.
Right.
It's about breaking free from the past so we can move forward in love. How do you think that helps people in their relationships?
I think it gives them a real tool to stop those cycles of hurt and resentment. Instead of being controlled by their past, they can choose to let go and heal. It's not easy, but it can completely change things.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgiveness was a big theme in these sermons. What about those other things Paul talks about? Patience, kindness, all of that.
There were some really interesting ideas about that too. Slavic Baptist Church had a unique take on patience. They went back to the original Greek word, makrithume, and pointed out it's not just about being patient with situations, it's about being patient with people.
Which can be way harder.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They used the example of Abraham Lincoln, He was known for being incredibly patient, even with his enemies. He even appointed someone to his cabinet who had publicly insulted him.
Wow, that's next level patience.
Right. It makes you think about how we treat people, especially those who annoy us.
Yeah, it's a good challenge to show that same grace and patience to the people who push our buttons.
Absolutely. So we've got patience, we've got forgiveness. What about kindness?
Yeah. Any good ones on kindness?
Menlo Church had a beautiful perspective on kindness. They focused on how truly listening to someone is an act of kindness. They even quoted David Augsburger, who said, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable.
Wow, that's powerful. It shows how much we all need to feel heard and understood.
Right.
Sometimes just listening to someone could be the kindest thing we can do.
It's about making them feel seen and valued. And it's something we can all do no matter who we are.
It's a simple thing, but it can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got forgiveness, patience, kindness. What about love protecting? That's a tough one to preach on, especially with all the pain and injustice in the world.
It is a challenge, but some pastors found really creative ways to address it. Remember Destiny Church and their David and Goliath analogy?
Oh yeah, the idea that sometimes you have to fight for what's right.
Exactly. They said that love isn't passive. Sometimes you have to be courageous and strong to stand up for what you believe in and protect those who are vulnerable.
It's like that saying, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Exactly. Sometimes love demands that we step up and confront injustice, even when it's hard.
Yeah, it reminds us that love isn't just about warm feelings. It's about taking action, even when it's uncomfortable or risky.
And sometimes that action is about protecting others, about shielding them from harm.
Were there any other takes on love protects that stood out to you?
Yeah, there was one pastor who shared a story about his own dad protecting him on a camping trip.
Okay.
It was a simple story, but it really showed how love often appears in those everyday moments,
Yeah.
in those small acts of protection and care.
It's the little things, isn't it? Like a parent protecting their child or a friend standing up for you when you're being bullied.
Yeah.
Those little things can mean so much.
Yeah, they show how deep and real our love is. And they remind us that love isn't just a grand gesture, it's a way of life. It's about showing up for each other in the big moments and the small moments, in the dramatic and the ordinary.
It's about making love part of everything we do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about being intentional with our love, about choosing to act in loving ways even when it's tough.
So we've covered forgiveness, patience, kindness, protection. Any other nuggets of wisdom from these sermons? Anything that really surprised you?
Well, one thing that came up a few times, and I found this really interesting, was the idea that love isn't about accepting sin. It's about helping people to change through showing them God's love.
So it's not about saying bad behavior is okay, but about holding people accountable in a loving way,
Right.
about telling the truth even when it's hard, because we care enough to want them to grow.
Exactly. It's about seeing that true love sometimes means challenging people, showing them their blind spots, and encouraging them to be their best selves. It's not always easy, but it's part of loving someone well.
It's about wanting what's best for them even when it's hard.
Yes. It's about believing in them even when they don't believe in themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so we've explored all these different parts of 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, but were there any sermons that looked at the bigger picture? Like, how does this message of love speak to us today in a world that can feel so divided and cynical?
That's where things get really interesting. Let's dive into that.
So we've talked about the different parts of love in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, but how did these pastors connect this to what's going on in the church today? What bigger points did they make?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting because this passage isn't just some old text. It speaks to us right now. Menlo Church, for example, they had a whole sermon on politics and faith, and they used 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 as their guide.
Politics in the pulpit, that's
Well,
always a tough one. How did they handle that?
Well, they started by acknowledging the pain and division in our world today, you know.
Yeah.
But instead of avoiding it, they leaned into it,
Hmm.
and they used this passage as a way to talk respectfully, even with people we disagree with.
So it's about finding common ground even when we have those differences?
Exactly. And they said something really interesting. They said the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear.
Hmm.
And that fear is what's driving so much of the fighting we see.
Yeah, fear of the other, fear of losing control, fear of the unknown.
It's powerful. And they said, when we let fear control us, we just create more division, more anger. But when we choose love, even for those we disagree with, we open up the possibility of understanding and healing.
That's a radical idea these days, to choose love over fear, especially in politics.
It is, but that's what makes this passage so challenging and so important. It calls us to be better, to go beyond our selfish instincts.
It's about breaking down those walls and seeing each other as human.
Yes. They even talked about this article by George Packer about how America has split into 4 different groups with different values and beliefs. And they said that love, like the kind in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7, is the only thing that can bring us back together.
That's a message of hope, that even with all the division, there's still a way forward.
It's about realizing we're more alike than different, that we all need love and belonging. And when we choose to see each other with love, we can start to heal those wounds that divide us.
So it's not about ignoring our differences, but about going beyond them, seeing each other as people who deserve respect and compassion.
Exactly. It's about choosing love over fear, unity over division, and hope over despair. It's hard, but it's so needed in our world.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we've seen how that message can be shared in so many ways. Through powerful images, stories, analogies. It's about finding those things that connect with people, that make this old text feel new and relevant.
That's what I love about these sermons. It's like a lesson in how to communicate, how to reach people's hearts and minds.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired, how can they bring 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 to life in their own churches? What are some practical takeaways?
Well, first, don't be afraid to be creative. Find those surprising comparisons, those personal stories, those images that will make this passage come alive.
Think outside the box.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about words. It's about creating a culture of love. How can you give people chances to put these verses into action? To serve, to forgive, to be patient and kind.
Give them ways to actually live out these things.
Yes. And don't forget the power of personal stories. Encourage people to share how love has changed their lives, how forgiveness has helped them, how they've learned to be patient with difficult people.
Make it personal and real for them.
Exactly. And finally, don't shy away from the hard topics, the things that divide us. Use 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 as a way to have respectful conversations, to build bridges instead of walls.
Show that love isn't just a feeling, it's a force that can change the world.
It is. It's about choosing love over fear, unity over division, hope over despair.
It's a big task, but it's a message worth sharing. Well, listeners, that wraps up our deep dive into 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. We hope you found some new insights, some inspiration, and a fresh look at the power of this timeless passage.
Until next time, keep diving.